In the small country of Cambodia in Southeast Asia, one of the bloodiest regimes in history took power, the Khmer Rouge. In a mere 4 years, they killed 2 million people, or approximately 1 in 5 of Cambodia's population. But how did this radical group form, and how did it rise to power? Pol Pot, the leader of the Khmer Rouge, was born in 1925. At this time, he was still known as a boy named Salof Sar. His family were wealthy, landowning farmers in rural Cambodia, and Sar was given education at some of Cambodia's most elite schools. During this time, Cambodia was still colonized by the French, and so, in 1949, Sar went to study radioelectronics in France. During his time there, he became obsessed with communism, involving himself with the French Communist Party and meeting fellow communist Cambodian nationals. Many of his peers here later became executives in the communist Khmer Rouge. One issue though, he spent more time involved with communist groups than actually studying, and eventually failed his exams. This meant he had to go back to Cambodia. He went to Phnom Penh, the capital of Cambodia. In 1954, the French control of Cambodia ended. The Kingdom of Cambodia was born, with the Prime Minister being Norodom Sihanouk, and the King being his father. Sihanouk was generally good at modernizing nation cities, but in the countryside, people were still uneducated and poor. Additionally, Sihanouk also repressed opposing political ideas, especially the Communist Party of Kampuchea, the party that Salof Sar, and eventually with the pseudonym Pol Pot, started. Despite this, he was effectively building Cambodia. However, disaster would come with the Second Indochina War, or as the Western viewer probably knows it, the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War, or the Second Indochina War, started in 1955. It was a proxy war between the Soviet-supported Communist North Vietnam and the American-supported capitalist Southern Vietnam that the US eventually directly intervened in and lost. In this war, North Vietnam created supply trails and bases for Laos and Cambodia to directly aid anyone who opposed the South, and Sihanouk allowed for these bases to be built in Cambodia. While Sihanouk suppressed communists in Cambodia, he struck deals with communist nations like China and North Vietnam. He wasn't attempting to pick sides, but rather stay neutral in the volatile conflict beside him. Additionally, he broke off relations with the US. The US, especially as the front in Vietnam looked unfavorable, screamed communism. They feared the domino effect, the possibility of one country becoming communist after another. In 1969, the President of the US, Richard Nixon, and his advisor, Henry Kissinger, launched a bombing campaign to destroy the Vietnamese communists and their infrastructure within Cambodia. It was a bloodbath. Hundreds of thousands of Cambodians were killed by US carpet bombing, the majority being civilians. Overall, the US dropped 500,000 tons of bombs on Cambodia. To put that into perspective, this is greater than the amount of bombs dropped on Japan during World War II. Many fled to escape these bombs, coming into contact with and under the protection of the Khmer Rouge, which is a nickname given to the Communist Party of Kampuchea. So when I say Khmer Rouge, I mean Communist Party of Kampuchea. Anyways, the bombings allowed the Khmer Rouge to soar in popularity at the time, as heroes sheltering people from US bombs. Eventually, the pro-American National Assembly of Cambodia got sick of Sihanouk's distancing from the US. As a result, they planned a coup, allegedly with US help. In 1970, while Sihanouk was abroad, the National Assembly of Cambodia voted him out and replaced him with the US-backed Marshal Lon Nol. This left Sihanouk exiled to Chile, who as a result endorsed the Khmer Rouge through radio broadcast. The pro-American Lon Nol also gave America the okay to continue the relentless bombing of Cambodia for Vietnamese communists. These two factors would contribute to the Khmer Rouge's popularity. Eventually, Cambodia imploded into a civil war. Technically, it had started earlier under Sihanouk's rule, but it ramped up under Lon Nol. It was a war between the Khmer Rouge, backed by North Vietnam and other communist nations who had control of the countryside, and the newly formed Khmer Republic, backed by South Vietnam, the US, and non-communist allies who ruled the cities. As the war drew on and on, Phnom Penh became more and more isolated as the Khmer Rouge gained more of the countryside. Eventually, the Khmer Rouge stopped supply routes to the city, starving it out. Additionally, in 1973, the US ended its bombing of Cambodia, and the South Vietnamese troops stopped supporting the Lon Nol regime. In 1975, the Khmer Republic lost. It succumbed to the military pressure of the Khmer Rouge and didn't have the supplies to continue. So, on the 17th of April, 1975, the Khmer Rouge marched into the capital, declaring their new Cambodia, or Democratic Kampuchea, a Cambodia they claimed would end 2,000 years of Cambodian history, and would start anew at year zero. One of the bloodiest regimes, a regime that would kill a fifth of their people, was now in power. Cambodia was stuck in a bad geopolitical situation with a powerful neighbor in civil war. It faced the wrath of a colonial master, then of a superpower, then of a dictator. Now, If you're the average Cambodian citizen and you see this dictator get overthrown by a group that protected your people from the wrath of the superpower's bombs, you would celebrate. And celebrate they did, but not for long. Immediately, Khmer Rouge soldiers cut Cambodia from communication with the outside world and commanded that the residents of Phnom Penh leave. They said that America was about to bomb the city now that they had taken it. The civilians were given no time to pack and were forced at gunpoint to go. For weeks, they forced the residents to move forward to an unknown destination. No exceptions. Children had to endure this as well. The sick were dragged out of hospitals, and women gave birth on this trail, and it was keep moving or get shot. If you were too frail and were unable to continue, you were left to die on the side of the road, your corpse rotting in the heat. The capital of 2 million people practically became a ghost town. What waited for those forced out by the Khmer Rouge was agricultural labor camps, with brutal punishments for those who stepped out of line. It was in these labor camps hundreds of thousands of Cambodians succumbed to exhaustion, hunger, and disease due to the horrible conditions. Then, Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge got to work on what they called eliminating dangerous ideals. Cars, jewelry, money, radio, books, and clothes that were not of a farmer were destroyed. Anything that was representative of Cambodia before the Khmer Rouge, or any sign of individuality, was wiped out. This also included religion. Christianity, Buddhism, and especially Islam were targeted. Up to 500,000 people, or 70% of the Cham Muslim population, were slaughtered. Another singled out group was the ethnic Vietnamese. Anything that conflicted with the idea of a single, homogeneous Khmer people was cause for execution. Knowing a foreign or minority language was punishable by death. Family structure was also dismantled, with forced marriages and the removal of children from their parents, as the Khmer Rouge didn't want people to be loyal to their families. The biggest target, however, was education. Sihanouk had previously built numerous schools in an attempt to bring more education to Cambodia. Under Pol Pot, the Khmer Rouge destroyed 90% of them. They burned books as well. The only schools not destroyed were put to other uses, such as prisons and Khmer Rouge administrative centers. The educated were seen as byproducts of capitalism, and the Rouge sought to eliminate them. It's estimated they killed 75% of teachers, 96% of college students, and 67% of all primary and secondary students. Pol Pot also kickstarted a 4-year plan to build socialism in all fields. These included economic projects that all failed and the creation of educational institutes that taught quote-unquote revolutionary ideals. The primary schools went on for 2 hours a day and mostly just fed kids propaganda, spending the majority of their time singing songs that praised the Khmer Rouge. If you dare violated their codes, you'd be sent to prison without evidence, tortured, and most probably murdered. The most notorious of these prisons was the S-21, which had a 99.95% death rate. In other terms, out of the 15,000 people sent there, only 7 survived. Overall, an estimated 2 million men, women, and children died under the rule of Pol Pot, or in other words, a fifth of the population. The average life expectancy under this regime was just 12 years old. The Khmer Rouge was not only paranoid about their citizens, but also about their former ally, Vietnam. The Khmer Rouge, fearing the Vietnamese, fought them on their borders. Vietnam's borders with democratic Kampuchea were deadly due to the border skirmishes. Khmer Rouge troops would routinely massacre Vietnamese civilians. The Vietnamese government had enough, and in 1978, Vietnam invaded. The Khmer Rouge was simply no match militarily, even with Chinese help. Vietnamese troops tore through democratic Kampuchean armies. On January 7th, 1979, democratic Kampuchea fell, marking the end of one of the bloodiest regimes in history. However, this wasn't the end of the Khmer Rouge, who continued to fight the Vietnamese in the Cambodian countryside for over a decade. They slowly fell apart, officially dissolving in 2003. In 2009, the first trial was held for surviving Khmer Rouge executives, many sentenced to life. Unfortunately, Pol Pot died before he could be brought to justice. But with the Vietnamese invasion and subsequent warfare, it was the end of the Khmer Rouge. Today, Cambodia is still facing challenges, but it's making good progress. It's now one of the fastest growing economies. Its poverty rate has dropped from 33.8% to 17.8% in a matter of 10 years. Its average life expectancy has improved as well, with the average Cambodian now living until 70. While its years as democratic Kampuchea are gone, the scars remain. Many people who lived through the Khmer Rouge's terror are still alive today, with the trauma of the genocide still upon them. Additionally, most teachers died under Pol Pot, so Cambodia essentially had to and is still rebuilding their education system from scratch. Cambodia has not recovered from Pol Pot, but through their resilience, they are still going.